Well, that sucks for Germany. Here in the September-October turn, Germans got the first action. They only spent a point. They had this big +5. But they said to themselves, okay, well, all the bidding ended up. We have France behind us. We can't go do a demand the Sudetenland or whatever. We could, but so instead they took a pass, gave themselves a big +15 for the upcoming turn. That's still not going to help because, if either Britain or France shoves themselves into a later position that's high in the order, they're going to get a chance to go, after Germany. And then Germany rolled a big bad too. They could have gotten away with it. How are they to know? They don't want to just launch an invasion of Poland, although they've got an army big enough to do so. They kind of want some kind of payoff from the Western Allies for this. If we're going to go to war with Russia, we want something, an alliance, something. And the Western Allies are kind of, nah, that's okay. Nah. And Russia's kind of trying to spur the Germans on towards an attack against the West instead. And Russia and Japan may be able to provide cover for Germany by putting in big bids of their own to do things. And maybe a German-Russian alliance. That really helps Germany a lot. It doesn't help Russia very much, but it helps Germany. But Russia's got some worries right now. It helps Germany because they're able to. It reduces the level at which the Russian garrison counts even more. And there are actually specific restrictions, I think, that come into play once you start invading things like Turkey. I don't know if they just prevent Russia from declaring war or what, but they make Russia much, much less capable of joining into a war, which means Germany then has a free hand against the West and can turn against them. And Germany kind of wants that for the simple fact that the West outproduces them. And Russia kind of wants that for the simple fact that the West outproduces them, too. And in particular, what they want to do is avoid... They want to make sure the West pays before the war really starts out in earnest. They don't want the democracies to be sitting on all this imperial territory that they have. Yeah, imperial democracy. But Rome had it too, or they had an empire before they were an empire, at least. Anyway, the Germans should have probably just said, "Hey, we'll take it." But in the number 2 space with the French, the chance of this happening is pretty damn low. It's 1 in 12 or something like that. So, not the 2 in specific, a 3 or less. So, I guess we move on to the actual fighting again. 38 is turning into a pretty lousy year for everybody, really. Wars continue. Japanese not gaining any ground in China. The limited offensive is just so crappy. Russia, however, finishes off the Baltic states. They're out of play. Fails to get any ground, obviously, in Finland. They really have to wipe out the Finnish army to be able to. Nobody's supporting that thing, but it's big enough that it's hard to wear down, given that the Russians are attacking at a disadvantage. Turkey, we're almost there. We've got 3. I think it takes 4 to take Ankara. This is only 2. We do have to attack Istanbul separately, so the Turkish army may withdraw and just give up Asiatic Turkey. The problem with that, of course, is the Russians can slip in through Bulgaria if they get an activation to bring Bulgaria into the war, which right now, actually they can't. It's not a major power war. We could move forces there, though, and make an attack across this border, which is no better than across the strait. So, but we would be able to make 2 separate attacks, which would make life a lot harder on the Turks. They might be able to delay things for a while because of that. And of course, that's the war that triggers the possibility of somebody going to war with Russia. But until Germany gets something, they're not going to. And the Allies kind of screwed around with that by starting to build some boats. And Germany said, oh, no, you don't. You're not knocking my political effectiveness down. So the Allies had to rebuy boats. And Germany's like, well, I can't build an army to face Russia while you're screwing around with boats. You guys have to have some give if you want me to fight the Russians. And at the same time, they're kind of trying to carry some back channel discussion on with Russia of, something like the Ribbentrop plan with splitting Poland and everything. Look, those are the guys that we got to worry about. One of us can come out ahead. We ought to be concentrating on how can we defeat the Western allies. And Russia's kind of like, I don't know about that, but maybe if I get Turkey, yum. The problem is Russia has a hard time declaring war on people. Being a communist nation, they're just inherently more peaceful. Spanish Civil War ended, and now Spain's nationalists are in the center spot. That's not guaranteed. Basically, God, this is worded horribly, but basically they're this far in from this side, and then they count back towards the center. So they would have been strongly anti-Soviet, but not really decided as to the capitalist versus dictatorship side of things. As it stands, though, this is about as good a place as over here. The big thing is the Spanish nationalists hate the USSR and they hate France. So that gives them a lot of power. These guys just dislike Italy. And what that means is it's going to be very hard for anyone except the fascists and Nazis to sway Spain to their side, because those specific countries can't control them. Now the Brits could do it still. There are no rules for what happens to their military, what happens to their diplomatic connections. I figured it's a new government. It clears out all of that. Their treaties are gone or whatever. But you could make an argument that they would probably maintain their trade agreements. I don't know. But I cleared everything out and said, let's start over. Because, I don't know, it makes sense either way, really. And there's no rules governing it. I'm getting kind of fatigued doing this. It's not really that pleasant to do this bidding type of warfare. And the game's beginning to devolve more and more into that. So, I'd rather have a system like Pax Britannica has, where you get to do a simple kind of normal war game with some luck and everything in it, instead of this playing rock, paper, scissors with numbers. But that kind of thing can be fun. I don't find it particularly enjoyable, even in multiple players. The game Dune, which is sort of a classic. Where's my copy? Has kind of a bid your troops type of mechanism. It's kind of cute, but it interferes so much with solitaire play, and in Dune there's so many other things at play. It's not just pick a number. Here it's pick a number, and I end up just kind of trying to go with some simplified decision making, which probably is pretty fair, actually. So like the Soviets are attacking, well, they're going to send 30 in. Let Turkey decide what it wants to defend with. I want to get this over with as soon as possible, so I'm not going to take any chances. I'm not going to try to play for tricks. Similarly, I'm going to send 10 in against Finland. Certainly here I sent 10 in. Here it's a little trickier because the Japanese have two different sections. The Chinese pretty much have to divide their troops equally, though, and try to defend completely. And the Chinese are so hosed, in theory, if they can't get more troops in there. But they're not losing any ground. It's kind of a neat thing about the limited war. I don't like how it works. It won't work anything like this in WIF. What's going to happen in WIF is the Japanese will gain ground very slowly, but they will gain ground. If they're doing a limited war. Instead of, wiping out, they won't be wiping out the Chinese army, but they will be taking over locations that are of some importance for their economy. Instead, what's happening here is the Chinese army is getting wiped out, but there's no no cost in terms of terrain taken. Now, the Chinese could bid less in their attacks and lose less troops, and that might actually be wise, but in doing so, they'd make the Japanese lose less troops. I'm just hoping, although we can see here, I put bids in for China and the US, and they didn't get anywhere. I'm hoping to be able to get a Lend-Lease so I can ship an extra 5 troops. That'll, every turn, that'll double, China's defensive capabilities, really, in terms of not what they get right away, but their production is only 4 troops a turn. So if I can send an extra 5 a turn, man, they're going to be pretty potent, and Japan may be forced to take it to the full war. So that's why you could argue the Chinese are defending full out. Another thing is you definitely do not want 10-1. If the Japanese get 10-1, and they're able to attack with 30, 40 troops from these different sides, if they're able to get 10-1, they don't take any losses, and clearly they're going to get a couple offensive successes in each case. I don't see much chance of the Chinese turning this around against the Japanese in any sense of the way. Although the guesswork game can actually do that, because the Chinese could apply part of their troops on defense and then try to counterattack, and there might not be very many Japanese troops left, and the Chinese might get an offensive back. And if they do that, if they ever win an offensive that they're attacking with, then they're kind of taking away a Japanese offensive that was paid for over here. Now, we don't have the points. The Japanese have, added 15 points or so to the U.S. intervention on them. And I don't know that anybody else is. The U.S. cares so much about China that it's almost a, hey, stay out of China. It's the one thing the U.S. gives a shit about in the world for whatever reason. It's the one thing that can bring them into the war. Now, I'm not sure I'm all that worried about the U.S., but once they come in, they can start gearing up to a big nasty multiplier. And when you're doing 17 factories at times 3, well, that's only 40. That's 42 points. They have that kind of production on their own, so are close enough to it. So they can be scary big in a way that once Britain or France gets up to that high production, they're not going to be. They have to kind of get some of that U.S. production in. Right now, France is not even able to make their limit. Britain's right around their limit at the double production. And so are other people. Germany, Russia at single is really, they have some flexibility to process more production once they go up to double. Italy's not going forward because they just don't have the raw materials to access, and they kind of want to go to war with Yugoslavia, grab a couple more raw materials, but that's not, I don't know, there's not a lot to be gained there, and same thing with Greece, whatever. There's just not a whole hell of a lot for them to get in Europe, so it's going to be it's a tough call for them as to how to get things. Spain may be the bonus. They can get some of the resources out of there now. Supporting the miners, in this case the Little Entente, is harder than I thought. I thought you just had to get one of those suckers up there to fire off their thing. No, you have to have the other one do so too. To get this successfully off, you need the Commonwealth to play a 0 action as well, a specific one. And what that means is we got all the way down to France. Germany took its shot. They said, wow, France is pretty far down. There's a good chance we'll get it off. And we probably won't get another shot. They just, the bids from Japan and Russia were high enough. I think they were default bids, but they were high enough that the Germans thought they had a pretty good chance. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. And if you play this successfully, none of the effects of Germany 8 So I think Germany 8 does take effect, which means the Sudetenland has just fallen to the Germans. It's almost impossible to have both of the allies step in and say, no. When the truth of the matter is, at this point, probably if France had the willpower to do so on their own, they could have. But, yeah, I mean, the whole point is, the way this mechanism works, we probably could have gotten away with it last turn, as well as the Germans. So, just because the French were down below, the Western allies are just going to have to keep pumping points and make sure that they're up towards the top. They can always take a dive down in the layers, at least with one of them. The other one can play the 0F. Not that that's terribly useful. The 0F on its own is just respond to another MP's proposed action. But the ordering doesn't seem to be important in that. But anyway, it looks like Czechoslovakia is gonna fall now. I don't believe there's anything that can be done about grabbing the rump. And I'm not really sure that you can stop the Germans from taking the Danzig corridor if they want it. They probably don't terribly want it. It doesn't give them what they need. They need more factories, and so they kind of want all of Poland. So we'll see where we go from there. But at this point, the Germans were not stopped. What did the Japanese do? They were the one that didn't. They boosted their bid this turn. They're looking at gearing up again because they have slightly more resources than they need, and they could acquire more through diplomacy or through conquest eventually or whatever. So getting that gearing limit seems reasonable to them. I'll have to check the American entry levels though. Military side of things, the lousy weather, mud, prevented any ground from being gained, but there's still an attritional value. The Turks actually gave up the ground. They gave up all of Anatolia so that they can defend Istanbul, because the Russians can launch an attack coming out of Bulgaria. They don't have the Bulgarian troops yet, but they haven't called them into the war. But that doesn't, there is no war they can call them into. They can shift them here and push them in. And next turn it'll be coming attacks from two separate areas, which means Turkey's pretty much hosed, even with the bad weather. Finland, still attritional and still not going terribly badly against them, but they picked decent numbers actually, it turns out, taking very few losses. But at some point or another, Russia could even launch an invasion if the weather was good. I just don't even think about that, but I'm such a land type of person. I still have to do the production, but I'm gonna peel away for a while before I get to that. Okay, actions here in the first turn of 39. Japan is continuing to roll over their bid points. It doesn't really get them much. They have to pay $1 a turn to keep that going, but they really don't want to gear up until they have a little bit more production. And it allows them to actually activate miners so that they can trigger them and see, ooh, do we want this, to happen. China put a big bid in. It's hoping either Britain or the US would be allowed to push forward a treaty. The US put a big bid in too, but Britain got stuck in the middle. I don't know, Britain had bonuses coming to them. They didn't put a big bid in, and the US kind of screwed up, should have been ahead of them. You can see Germany and Italy fell behind. This is kind of a pity, because this was an opportunity turn for Germany. They could have demanded the Danzig corridor. But they're basically, I think, going to say, look, you give that to me and maybe I can go against Russia, but, if I don't have it, I can't. There are other problems, though, which is, that's not a sufficient borderland, and an attack on Romania would require the Western Allies to respond, or at least France. So really the only way through looks like it's Yugoslavia. I mean, this little channel, the connection here is one of them 10-point connections. You're not going to launch much of a war across something like that. Anyway, basically nobody got anything done. The reason this was such an opportune turn for Germany, I don't know if I stated that, it's because France had a mandatory election. They failed to get their election because they tried to pull the little Entente bonus last time. Well, they failed at that, and now they're going to... and this was their makeup election. I don't think it counts for this year, so they've still got another one. Poor France. I mean, their yearly elections is just horrible for them in this. Oh. If the Danzig corridor is... no. Germany did not want to grab the Czechoslovakian rump because that boosts the Commonwealth and French responses. They become much more effective politically. To an extent that, you know, they're up there with Germany in terms of being able to actually act. So I guess things just continue. China didn't have enough points to up their own production efficiency, and they're just getting left behind, and Japan's going to probably be able to grind them down, I think. We'll see. The big news is Turkey fell at this point. Look to see if the Turkish Navy can be captured or something. Attacking from both directions, there really wasn't anything that could be done. We managed to take the most Russian troops down that we could, which was like 10 of them, 5 from each attack, but this is just not very defensible. The main Turkish area has a lot of spaces in it, but I probably shouldn't have abandoned that, but the problem was I wasn't sure I could defend this and not just get overrun. I had to consolidate my troops in one area, basically. Well, it didn't work. There was a last-ditch naval effort, which is why the Turkish Navy is so small. I have to check, though. I think I know in WIF there are provisions when a country is conquered that its navy ends up going over to you, scuttled, or going to allies. I'm not sure in this. I don't remember any such rules there. So I'll have to look for that. The other things I have to look for is, at this point, we're in this weird sort of stasis where nobody really wants to do anything because the Soviets have gotten so powerful comparatively. Both the dictatorships and the democracies are worried about Soviet power in a way that they weren't before. And they've been kind of willing to almost work together, but not to the extent of actually giving up alliances and such. Now, the Germans can go break Allied alliances, and that'll be easier if I don't take the rest of Czechoslovakia first. And maybe even, you know, either get the country allied with the Germans or just attack it in the case of a Poland or something. And in a sense, the Allies might be willing to allow that because their real problem is they don't want to suffer the political effectiveness cost of not supporting an ally. On the on the other side, though, Germany kind of wants some sort of guarantee, and there's not much you can give of you know, an alliance and the non-aggression pact, etc., before they roll into Russia. And they're also not all that powerful. Their own army is not really bigger than the Russian one. It's actually probably smaller still, even after these combats. The only difference is we have a little bit more money than the Russians do right now. But not enough that it really makes this anything like a sure thing. And, you know, if we're attacking Russia in a year or whatever, the Western Allies are going to come in when they're allowed to break the treaty. Actually, I think they're not allowed to break it that quickly. So we might buy a lot of time by cutting a deal with them, but that kind of negotiation is really tough. And meanwhile, Russia's kind of running out of places to expand into. Once they get Finland, well, there's Sweden. That's a possibility. People might want to start laying down alliances as a barrier That's one of the things I hadn't been doing. There is this huge barrier with the Little Entente and with Yugoslavia and stuff like that of countries you really can't just declare war on. You need these. Germany needs the special events to like absorb them, rather than regular war, which is kind of weird. It's like, but you don't really want to allow. It's pretty clear that you'd have to have special rules one way or another because an all-out invasion of Belgium would almost certainly bring France into play and Britain into play. But it's not so clear that Denmark couldn't have been seized, whatever mechanisms were in place to degrade the Eastern alliances might have worked elsewhere, but I'm not quite sure where. Yugoslavia, I think, seems like an option where certain similar circumstances could arise. Maybe not Denmark. And if they continued to move east, who knows what would happen. Also, there's the problem of Russia. In the case of both Poland and Czechoslovakia, the response is all on the west side. A muscular Russia like we have here might have been able to stand up. Russia had... No, they do not. I thought they had an alliance with the Czechs. But they have an alliance with some of these other powers, or at least an interest with some of them, not with Poland, obviously. I think they're not even allowed an alliance with Poland. But, yeah, so... And Poland's not allowed to ally with Germany. They're allowed to have an alliance, I guess, because they started with one, but they're not allowed to stack with them and be brought into the war, which kind of gets rid of one little potential opening. A slightly different Germany might well have been able to solidify some very good relations, very good anti-Soviet relations with Poland. And I feel like the game kind of freezes you into a certain historical mindset, even though it's so wide open and wacky in so many ways. It's kind of weird. Anyway, I got a lot to look up, and this isn't the time to be doing it. Germany's finally able to get some sign of support from the West. Let's go over what happened. The Japanese geared up. I forgot to mark them. I marked everything else there. Up to the 3. They are a little above their 2, and I'm finding I just don't have enough money to keep up with the Chinese. I'm not going to be able to overrun them completely. With the gearing up, I should be able to make some better ground than I've been doing. I may even forego an offensive this turn because I don't have a lot of troops, and I don't expect the weather is going to be very good for gaining ground. The U.S. finally got its treaty with China, though, and this is the problem. The treaty with China is going to be worse because that's going to be pumping 5 extra troops a turn. And China being able to get its multiple up would also be worse. But this is probably the worst case scenario because I can lose Chinese territory and still be getting about the production that I've been getting, which has been holding kind of a stalemate. So things aren't going to be getting much better there. Germany, put it on the line. They had a few options this turn, but it looked like the Western Allies were going late, and they said, okay, I'm demanding the Danzig Corridor. Only Britain need respond to this. France isn't required for this. It's not like Czechoslovakia. And Britain got an activation, and Germany said, look, you want me to go after Russia? This is step 1. You can't deny me this. This is my access route to Russia. Yes, I'm going to get another one, and we'll deal with that as it comes. But otherwise, I'm going to go make an alliance with Russia, and screw you guys. Britain bought it. And they did a League of Nations request at German, another enough is enough request on Finland this time. I don't know how likely Finland is to recover, though. With Japanese controlling them, there's kind of a, well, should we really support them at all? Should we, devote part of a factory to producing resources for them? Finland is not a Japanese allied country, but they are German now, so they may start funding that up, because they may have a long-term goal if they can get China out of the way and move against Russia. And if Russia can be knocked out of the war mostly, I think that the dictatorships have a pretty good chance of taking on the West. But we don't know for sure. Anyway, that's where we are at this point. We'll go on with the military. I don't expect anything too exciting to happen for the rest of the turn. And he continues to drag her feet about doing anything. I'm kind of hoping to push Russia into an anti-Western allies stance, but still kind of balancing off this, hey, you gotta ally with me, this, that, and the other. This time there wouldn't have been any chance for an alliance anyway. The U.S. upped their gearing, which of course keeps them further out of the war, but lets them, do more. Whether when they come in or whatever. They're at their maximum peacetime production. The Soviets, what the hell did they do? They made an alliance with Greece, and that pushed Greece all the way into the communist camp. However, we'll see, the Germans kind of triggered Bulgaria. That made Bulgaria unhappy, and the German, was it the Germans? No, the Japanese triggered Bulgaria. You don't actually have to have your own political chits in a country to trigger it. Japan's action was pretty minor. It was an economic agreement over here in Argentina. You can't really ally with these suckers without pissing the shit out of the U.S., Monroe Doctrine and all that. So you got to be really careful about what you do in the Western Hemisphere. But you can get trade agreements with them, and that's cool. And then the Germans granted Romania, her gains from World War I. Basically, there's two options. You can either support the Bulgarians, Hungarians, or you can support Romania. Well, it doesn't look like Romania is going to end up being too pissed at Russia. So pulling them off in this direction, getting all those resources in my favor. In some ways, not having Romania in the war, but having the resources available is kind of nice. So it might be nice to keep them there as a source of that oil and everything. Of course, they could be convinced to stop providing them through other means. And that has caused a little bit of anger over in Hungary, a lot in Bulgaria, but who cares? Bulgaria is firmly in the Russian camp, or was until the Japanese kind of pulled them off, but now they're available to be sucked back in. One problem the Russians have, they're going to probably have to get out of Romania, or Bulgaria, is that Bulgaria and Greece hate each other. So I can't have them both in my space ready to be activated, but that's okay. You can activate one, it pulls it off the map from what I can tell, or the display, and then you pull the other one in and activate it. So as things get called into the war, because historically Germany had Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, all these countries, on their side, there has to be a way that you can do that. That's why I'm not looking up the rule too carefully. Anyway, we're on to the military season. Italy had been considering an invasion of Yugoslavia, but that looks ugly in terms of calling in allies, because there's people with alliances to Yugoslavia, notably both the Russians and the French. I don't really want to end up at war with either of them, so I feel like the Italians are kind of stymied right now. Grabbing Albania is something they can just do, but they kind of are afraid to. It doesn't look like the Balkans are aligning very nicely on their side, and it doesn't look like they're ready to fight a war down there. So they're getting getting some problems on that side of things. And I guess we continue this war with Finland, but and with China, of course. But who knows? You know, that's the League of Nations resolution is based on Finland, and Germany's just kind of letting the clock run out on that one too, being a real dick. Let me check the weather. All right, the weather's going to be mud, which means less likelihood of getting successful offensives that actually gain ground. We'll fight that out and see what happens. A weird turn that outlasted its expected duration. The U.S. figuring that they wouldn't see any of their allies come in on this, given the layout, went with what? Something totally pointless. They're starting the Spanish Civil War over again. So now there's a Republican Civil War, and I'm not sure what anybody hopes to achieve from it. The Spaniards are sitting here, and this is just so pointless. It was a total waste, but the U.S. really didn't have much they wanted to do. They probably should have thrown a bunch of points, taken a pass and taken the, plus 3 times, except for that doesn't do them any good. They're at a 0. Maybe they should have tried to improve their effectiveness or build a factory or whatever. They pretty much put a bid in, and then the way things kind of fell, they said, oh, we really didn't want one. We needed China to be up there to raise our treaty level, or maybe if Britain or France were right up at the top, we would open up a treaty with them, because what the hell, we'll probably want it someday. Italy. Italy did economic with Norway, of all places. They're basically looking for some place that they can get resources from that doesn't screw things up. And Spain would have been the best place, but the Spanish Civil War actually screwed with that. So you're not going with that. Germany took Czechoslovakia this time, and that's just gone. Hungary still exists. Don't worry about that. I know it looks like a hole there, but Britain made an alliance with Belgium, which kind of pissed the U.S. off a little bit, but not that much. That was kind of a risky thing. They could have just gone for a guarantee on Belgium, but the alliance allowed them to move Belgium towards the democracies, which I saw as kind of important, as well as the, hey, we're assuring them their existence so we can come in on a war. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're looking at, Germany could just declare war on France, and there isn't a whole hell of a lot we can do about that. And without the French responding, we can't even make an alliance with France. I'm assuming I get a casus belli. It isn't spelled out. If you attack a major I'm allied with, I'm not positive of that. And then Russia, last but not least, looked at, hey, this would be a great time to invade Romania, but unfortunately for them, although they beat the French initiative, the French are Romania's ally, they didn't beat Romania's willpower, so they couldn't go in. So they took the pause, the pass action. That's 12 extra points for next turn, so they'll probably be doing it next turn. Unfortunately, next turn, we're starting to get into September, October. The weather gets shitty, and we end up in another one of these situations where we're not really gaining the ground we want to. But at least we can get a lot of armies into Romania, and a lot of little sections to capture in Romania, though, which is weird. Some of them just don't have any value, though, so I don't know how we handle them. They're territories that can be handed off that don't really matter. When it comes down to it, it's right there that matters. I think those territories don't even have to be captured. I think they're just sort of hypotheticals, but who the hell knows with this game? Anyway, that gets us through everything until we do the military. The military's been pretty much static for the last year or so. Yeah, we've been trying, but not much has happened. And unlike the historical, this September, October of 39 has turned out to be just about nothing. Because of the ordering that came up. Russia made an alliance with Bulgaria, getting them back into the center here, basically. And then they picked up some negatives afterwards. France held their election. Britain held their election. The U.S. Damned if I can tell what the U.S. did. I don't have anything recorded. Oh, the U.S. They improved their effectiveness. They spent a lot of money to boost themselves up, and now they're at +1. If they ever deal with the naval thing, but without their production getting up, and it doesn't get above 1 until they're in war, it's going to be hard for them to accumulate money the way some other countries do. Plus, with them spending $5 a turn towards China, it's really hard for them to surpass the German naval points. France and England can do it now, but well, it might be worth it to send them above, just to force Germany to make a choice there. Britain also held an election. They don't have to hold it anytime soon. They've got 3 years to do it in, but getting it out of the way seemed like a good idea. Japan banked their points for their next turn. Not that I think they necessarily need it, but here's the thing. They weren't expecting to get a bid out. You know, they put their buck in, but whatever. And likewise, here's the whole thing. China, you know, the U.S. would have increased their alliance with China if they had known they were going to get that far. They tried to bid China up to do that, but instead China got to go last, and they geared up, so it's not terribly bad. And they can get out of the peacetime because they're in some form of war with Japan. From what I can tell, it counts as a war for all purposes except a few that are specifically called out. So that's where we are there. See what the weather's going to be like. If it's clear, I might remember to try to do that invasion of Finland. And it is, so we'll see if I can remember to do that. We might be able to just dislodge Finland completely. There isn't a whole hell of a lot left. During the military phase, I didn't have to do the invasion. The normal crossing went. Finland has fallen, which means the Russians can maybe press into Norway next. Who knows? They have this kind of vague desire to get into war with France if they can force it. An invasion of Romania would put France to the test. But as far as I can tell, these are all little separate areas in Romania. They have no strength points, so I don't know how they're conquered, but I guess I'll give them a notional point so that they fall. But what it means is Romania is really bloody hard to attack because you have to attack through these little sections that, you know, are really just divvying up the nation for other reasons than military. So, for example, this little dashed line here, well, this is the possibility of giving Transylvania to Hungary. This is the possibility of giving Dobruja to Bulgaria, Bessarabia to Russia. If they don't get given, if those areas don't get stripped away, why is Romania so much harder to conquer than, say, Spain? You know, and is it really? That's the other question, because as a notional area with only one, one defensive, not factor, but one defensive. It only takes one offense successful to take it. So you drive the enemy out of it, and you get it fairly easily. Japan finally succeeded in getting an invasion, an offensive success here. And that, of course, drove up U.S. tension. But the total is at like 18. It's just bouncing around. It was up, in the 25 range up here now, down to 21, 18. Actions that especially Russia, non-Axis powers have been taking, have been, keeping the U.S. from being really willing to go to war. But more than that, even the Allied factions have been doing things which are suppressing that point value. And Russia hasn't been very active, although they succeeded in their invasions. Those points were accounted for back when we were, in the 20s. So, by letting this play out over time, maybe it's actually becoming possible, whereas otherwise it would have skyrocketed U.S. intervention with a total war. But on the other hand, all of China would have fallen, and that would have been a big production boost. That extra space and some of the political maneuverings, Japan seized Chile away from the Germans, kind of hurt German production, helped Japanese, and helped Italian, because the Italians are kind of dependent on the Japanese at this point. Not seeing any kind of relationship between Germany and Italy here, which is kind of weird, but Italy can provide ports to the Japanese and can give them access to the to the rich areas in Africa or whatever, and they can cut deals and pass goods back and forth in a way that Germany really has very little to offer to Italy, except for if we go to war, the German army is in play. Ooh, I forgot to buy some German navies, because I gotta worry about it, because France and Britain both boosted their navies, so I'll have to equalize those things and buy up some German navies to make sure that they keep themselves in third place. It was a quiet turn, and China, U.S. trying to get that alliance failed again in an ugly sort of way. I probably did these in the wrong order. I think the U.S. has to go first, but I can't keep the numbering straight, so I allowed it to stand. They would have discussed it and gotten it correct otherwise. I think actually the Chinese have to respond to the U.S. order, and they have to go after the U.S. in order for it to work. It's just all this Picayune shit that I probably would rather just not pay attention to. So, I'm kind of blowing it off here, but just to let you know, yeah, there are errors. So Japan got an action, and they did basically nothing. They increased Sweden, and here we're at countermix problems again. I don't have raw materials 1. Oh, God, I'm trying. This piece of shit camera. And then the U.S. didn't get their chance to fire off their action. All China did was its reaction to the U.S. action, which they didn't manage to get off. And now we'll go to the combat and the economics. Now, one thing that I didn't catch in time, but I caught it immediately or soon afterwards, was when Czechoslovakia got taken. That boosted English and French effectiveness. I mentioned that before, but I didn't actually mark it down. So yeah, China would have been better off boosting their own production multiplier, but they're pretty close to the end of their production here. So they have 7 factories. That means they could process 14 goods. They only have 12 goods. Actually make it 11 because the Japanese captured a territory. Chances are we're going to be in winter here. Russia was kind of hoping to start a war this turn, because they're kind of the only ones. A lot of people kind of were surprised by the bids, among others the US and Chinese bids that jumped them up. And also I forgot about the Japanese, who had a 9-point bid kicking around. They wanted an economic agreement, and just ended up blowing everybody's plans out of the water because of it. It's not something they terribly wanted, but they're just like, well, fuck it. I can't just pass every turn. All right. As to the military, there's a lot of counters here, because the U.S. has, I'm keeping their offensive counters under in the military stack to not confuse it with the political counters. They're probably going to win Spain this turn. Otherwise, we just have the continuing war in China. Let's see what our weather is. Our weather is going to be winter, which is increased casualties. But the Japanese could actually gain some ground off the offensive. Net effect of the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, was Spanish stay here, they turn into Republicans. Totally useless. If they had been over in the Soviet camp, they would have flung over out here somewhere, because it was over so quickly. But nobody really cared about this. The U.S. was cooing to try to get 2-3 dice, moving in their direction, so Spain would be providing production to one of the allied nations. And so then maybe they could bring them into the war as an ally or something. But as it is, it was just a totally pointless exercise from the course of the war. Over here, the Japanese went with a more mellow attack. They ended up getting a bad die roll, though, and causing 3 more U.S. tension. And they didn't even really try to take anything. I'm kind of looking at the possibility of an invasion, because then I'll be able to attack from 3 separate areas, and that'll make China's job harder and harder. Because but I couldn't do that in the winter. It takes 5 successes to get a space on the thing. And now I added up the spaces from here. I'm not sure that's legitimate. I got 4 in each last time, so I felt pretty shitty about that. But I really don't want to play the guessing game thing solo. I dislike it enough when I'm playing opposed, and I would rather avoid it when soloing. I still have to do the economics. I don't know what the hell. I feel like I'm really winding down here and trying to avoid playing too much more, but I'm reading through WIF's rulebook again. I certainly read through it completely once before I started all this, and I'm doing it kind of carefully, getting ready for the Barbarossa thing. I kind of would like to do that tomorrow, get it set up and started, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. It is a lot of rolls, and I just don't feel comfortable. I won't be doing an intro to that until I'm ready to do the whole boat and get a firmer grasp on how the rules actually apply. I'll probably be uploading videos, though. I know somebody's interested in them. But for this, we're just kind of putting our time in for no good reason at this point. This is a problem that I have with these kind of games, is I can't get over the hump to war. I can always find things to kind of optimize up to a point, and now I'm out of that and just kind of feeling like, well, now what? I'm not sure it's in anybody's advantage, because it's 3-sided to going to war, unless you can get 2 people to agree to work together, or 2 sides to work together. Well, we've gotten here, this may be the force for the fascists, but the U.S. managed to get another layer of treaty with China. And that means I'm going to be able to lend at least 10 build points each turn, which I don't know if Japan can keep up with that. We've gotten very little gain on China as it is, and I'm not saying the Chinese are going to be able to reverse the trend. It's just I don't think Japan can build, with the limited resources they have, the amount of points they need. Now you can say, well, why is Japan doing so crappy here? Part of it is, I think I forgot the surprise turn bonus, which would have given me some additional offensive points in that first turn. But not many. But that extra little bit of time may have bought China enough time to survive through this. But other countries, Germany did a treaty with Romania. What does that really do? It kind of preserves the stasis, and the stasis isn't terribly good for anyone except maybe the Western Allies. They're the ones who don't really want a war, but the problem is they've kind of been directing the Germans towards a German-Russian war. And I think Germany and Russia have to decide, screw the Allies, or Germany does, and stop trying to play this balancing act. But as of right now, see, they haven't been able to get that alliance out of the Allies yet, and they haven't made the alliance with the Russians yet. And they kind of have to choose one or the other before they go on. And I'm kind of stuck in this position where I can't do either. Britain got an economic penetration into Spain, which didn't do them a lot of good. You can see there are no points there. Somebody wiped them out. Basically because Japan and Italy both took pass actions, taking their 9, bid points for next turn, just to kind of prevent the Western powers from getting cheap actions. I had been thinking about, because of the setup, but figured, well, it's not all that likely. I had been thinking about trying to up the alliance level with Italy. I would have gone for it except the Brits have an alliance with the Netherlands. So the Italians can't even go in and conquer the rest of the Netherlands and finish them off. Which kind of screws things up. And as far as I can tell, those are still controlled by the Russians. You know, whoever directs their troops until they're called into a war, there doesn't seem to be a way to change that. So even though the Netherlands is way over here in Britain, U.S., actually they would be U.S. controlled at this point, doesn't get to direct the troops if the troops were chosen to be directed by someone else originally. So all we have really for military actions is the Chinese front and then building. And I'm just really discouraged at this point, and I have the fear that if I play the big game combined with this, I'll be in that same sort of discouragement, because in a lot of ways, the things that triggered World War II, well, those are all done. Those have all been kind of circumvented. And after you do that, oh, geez. I don't know why this is loose. That doesn't seem right. Maybe. After you manage to circumvent the big trigger actions, war can still happen, but it starts becoming less and less likely. It becomes something the players have to actually assess the situation and say, you know what, I actually want this. It's not sort of this standard, okay, well, I'll declare the Danzig because I want to get Poland and it's an easier way to get it. Right now, if Germany attacks Poland or Russia, well, first of all, Germany has a treaty with Poland, which makes it harder. They'd have to break that, and that's not trivial. And Germany is also somewhat hindered by the fact that France has a treaty with Poland, and France has a real army. I don't want to go into Poland. I mean, they didn't originally, but they got enough that I'm not sure I want to go into them at all anymore. I've delayed so much, I've let the numbers get so high. We're here in the early 1940, and I just don't trust my ability to push forward. It's not like France is outbuilding me, they're certainly not. But they're up against the wall here and building lots and lots of troops because I have no way to go above 100. So they keep spending them there. Luckily, I'm close to being able to start Barbarossa, but I'm really dreading playing with, actually. I can't hold all the rules in my head at all. And then I know eventually I come back to this with whiff or whatever. I'm doing the full whiff, and there's just no excitement in me. I have to do it because I've committed, and even if I hadn't said it online, I committed to myself. But shit, man, I just don't want to play anything anymore. Prior attrition had actually gotten China down to a point where they were in some danger, and Japan was able to get 2 offensives on them. Now that drove U.S. commitment, well, Japanese U.S. commitment up to 130, but the total for looking at a war with Japan, which would be the easiest, is at 33. That's about halfway there, but I mean, that was a big jump off of what essentially was one turn's activity. If you succeed in big things in China, you piss the U.S. off quickly. This might be the last sort of grab for it because, yes, we have another factory now, and we have more resources to devolve, and we're able to produce more troops. But I don't know if we're able to produce more. We're able to keep even with what Japan and the U.S. is creating. And we took huge losses to do that because this was a winter offensive where we took 50% losses, but we had to, multiply in order to get the values we had. We had to commit 5 times as many troops as the Chinese did. And that's where the problem is that, like, this limited offensive means that your army just gets hosed. I think I'm going to have to go to the full offensive, but that's really going to start cranking U.S. entry in. I don't know if I'm continuing, but we're almost done with this video anyway. So we'll think about it because we're pretty close to being able to start Barbarossa. And the military side of this game really doesn't please me at all. And that's where it's more and more going. It's, it's getting to the point where, yeah, those big armies are going to thrash together, and it's going to be this whole guessing game. How much space do you want to give up? What's the worth of that? This, that, and the other. And that's just no fun for me. I don't like the mechanism to begin with, and the bigger and bigger it gets as a part of the game, the worse it gets. Yeah, screw it. I'm done. I really want to be able to get a little bit of the whiff in before I go to the con, and I'm hoping at least to do Barbarossa. At least part of it. And whatever. And there's just not much here. There's not much left. There's a lot of game and a lot of time, but sort of the big maneuvers that are interesting. Remember, the original Days of Decision was written to cover the pre-war situation. This just extends that and creates something that allows you to play the entire war. It gives you kind of a purpose, which Days of Decision really didn't. I'll come back and talk about, even though I didn't really do a full game of it, I'll give a review type video for this. From the beginning, we knew we weren't going to finish it. But yeah, it really, it shows its roots by getting kind of uninteresting once it becomes nothing but a military game. Because the military side of it, at least for me, is just so dull. Alright, let's send it up.